There is a photograph that should not exist. It shows a small girl in a white hospital gown, standing before a gray wall. Her eyes are nothing but vertical streaks of light drawn upward, like the frame was stretched while the rest of her body stayed still. The label beneath the image reads only one word: exposure no. 6. According to reports, the glass plate was found in an asylum archive in 1954. Official records, however, list it as first catalogued in 1962. Some documents name the hospital as Hamburg, others Bremen. Even the date is disputed by decades. And yet, the plate itself is real. Chemical analysis confirms its age. The emulsion shows no cuts, no tampering, no signs of exposure twice. It's a photograph that, by every measure of optics, chemistry, and physics, should have been impossible. 3 anomalies define it. First, the streaked eyes that seem to move while the body does not. Second, the faint silhouette of another child upside down, embedded within the same frame. And third, the recorded temperature of the darkroom that day, 8 degrees colder than the rest of the building. Experts disagree on nearly everything about the image except one thing. It came from a hospital that no longer exists, a place where children were treated for disorders no one fully understood, by doctors who worked in the ruins of war. The photograph is not labeled as art. It is filed under medical documentation, Child Psychiatric Unit. No photographer is named, but a handwritten note on the envelope reads, "For restricted study crowd." What happened in that ward between 1951 and 1952 is the subject of decades of controversy. Some call it an early experiment in child neurology, others a haunting. Each account begins with one patient, a girl named Greta Akand, one doctor whose name appears, then disappears, across fragmented archives. Helene Krauss. Before her downfall, Krauss wrote that the image was not a trick of light. She believed it was the moment something unseen became visible. This is her story, the hospital's story, and the story of the photograph that scholars still cannot explain. In the early 1950s, Hamburg was still rebuilding itself from the war that had ended only 6 years earlier. Whole districts lay flattened. Thousands displaced families lived in what had once been barracks, factories, and abandoned hospitals. Among these improvised shelters was a children's psychiatric annex built inside a former naval hospital. It stood behind rusted gates on the city's western edge, its corridors lined with tiled walls and blackout shutters left over from the raids. The official name was the Staatliche Kinderklinik für Verhaltensstörungen, the State Clinic for Behavioral Disorders. Documents confirm it operated with a staff of 7 doctors, 12 nurses, and over 60 patients. Many of them were orphans. Resources were scarce. Electricity was rationed. The heating worked only in half the wards. Parents visited when they could, but travel permits were still difficult to obtain in post-war Germany. Into this environment arrived Dr. Helene Krauss. Some papers describe her as a neurologist trained in Munich. Others list her only as assistant examiner. Her credentials remain disputed, though her notes display remarkable precision. She was 34 when she joined the staff in April 1951. Colleagues later recalled her as distant, methodical, and deeply superstitious. According to hospital admission logs, her first major case was that of a 9-year-old girl named Greta H. She was admitted on the 23rd of May 1951 for persistent mutism following air raid trauma. Her family had been among the many relocated from Bremen after the destruction of their home. Greta's mother reportedly described her daughter as normal until the thunders broke, referring to the Allied bombings. Since then, Greta had not spoken a single word. Krauss approached the case as a study in post-traumatic aphasia. She documented Greta's daily behavior: drawing, sleeping, brief smiles during mealtimes. No overt signs of psychosis, no physical disability, only silence. In her surviving notes, Krauss wrote, "Child remains still even when startled. Eyes track movement, comprehension intact. There is speech within, but it refuses daylight." The clinic itself mirrored that refusal. Inside those walls, medicine advanced by trial, error, and intuition. Electroconvulsive therapy was performed with minimal anesthesia. Sedatives were administered by dosage, guessed from weight, not response. For children, observation often replaced cure. Outside the hospital, the city was learning to forget. Churches rebuilt themselves beside ruins. New faith mingled uneasily with new science. Every household carried its own ghosts. It was in this uneasy space between reconstruction and remembrance that Greta's condition began to change. And the shift was not gradual. It came suddenly. Precisely dated in a nurse's report, the 14th of June 1951. That was the day the silence broke. And according to those who were there, the words that followed were not her own. The event took place on the morning of the 14th of June 1951. The ward had just finished its routine breakfast: boiled oats, milk, vitamins dispensed in paper cups. Greta sat at her usual place by the window, her hands folded neatly, eyes on the wall. According to the nurse on duty, there was nothing unusual until the moment the ward clock struck 8. Without warning, Greta began to whisper. At first, no one understood her. Her lips moved too fast, and the rhythm was strange, like language run in reverse. When the nurse leaned closer, she realized the child was reciting a prayer. It was the Lord's Prayer, but every word spoken backward. The nurse called for help. 2 orderlies entered, assuming a seizure or delirium. Instead, they described hearing a second voice echoing from the corridor, perfectly synchronized, though the hallway was empty. Both accounts appear in handwritten reports filed the next day. No physician corroborated the echo, but each entry mentions an unnatural stillness in the room, as if the air had thickened. Dr. Krauss was notified immediately. She recorded the time, the temperature, and Greta's pulse normal in all respects. Then she ordered a phonograph recording of the next session. The recording was reportedly destroyed 2 years later in a basement flood that damaged much of the hospital's archive. No copy survives. Over the following days, Greta's behavior changed. She began to respond to questions, though her answers were fragmented, sometimes mirrored, as if each statement reflected itself. Her handwriting, once shaky and childlike, became suddenly formal, identical to samples in Krauss's own notebook. The staff grew uneasy. Several believed Krauss was projecting her own anxieties onto the patient. But one phrase appears repeatedly across the nurse's notes. The child speaks as if remembering something that does not belong to her. For Krauss, this was no longer a case of trauma. It was something entirely different, an intersection between memory, language, and whatever existed before speech itself. She wrote a single line in her journal that night. June 14th, voice returned, but direction reversed. It marked the first of many reversals to come. In the weeks after the June incident, Greta's sessions became the focus of the entire clinic. At first, she was kept under ordinary observation language exercises, reading tasks, memory games. Then, according to several witness accounts, she began to speak of things she could not have known. She mentioned ships by name, dates, coordinates, terms used in naval dispatches. Decades earlier, Dr. Krauss wrote that Greta recited the manifest of a vessel called Hansa, sunk in 1916 during the North Sea campaigns. No such information was available in the hospital library, nor in any text the child could have accessed. When Krauss checked the details, she found partial matches in archived maritime records. The ship had existed. The names of its officers were accurate. The cargo listed ammunition and tinned rations was correct. Colleague Dr. Ernst Lenz disputed the findings. He argued that Krauss had misheard or embellished. He accused her of searching for patterns in the ramblings of a traumatized child. But the nurse's notes from those sessions are consistent. Each describes Greta's voice shifting between her own and a deeper register, her vocabulary expanding beyond anything typical for her age. Krauss began calling the episodes transpositional memory. She described them as recollections from outside the patient's experience, private correspondence, later recovered from an estate sale. She wrote, "There are 2 memories inside Hertha known and the borrowed." The sessions continued twice daily. Krauss took temperature readings, blood pressure, and pulse before each experiment. On multiple occasions, she documented sudden drops in room temperature, as much as 6 degrees, though the building's heating system was constant. Another doctor repeated the measurement and found the same anomaly. Official maintenance logs confirmed no malfunction. As word spread through the clinic, skepticism deepened. Dr. Lenz petitioned the board to terminate the experiments, calling them theatrics of a desperate researcher. But Krauss persisted. She believed Greta's condition revealed a physiological bridge between mind and matter. The child, she said, was translating history into biology. One nurse recalled an evening when Greta began humming in rhythm with the power generator outside the ward. Each time the current faltered, her tone shifted, perfectly aligned. When asked to stop, she smiled and said, "It listens when I listen." Within weeks, the staff began referring to her as Das Echo, the Echo Child. Rumors circulated of lights dimming when she spoke, of medical instruments reacting before contact, though none of this appears in the official record. The frequency of unexplained maintenance requests from that wing increased dramatically during the same month. For Krauss, these were not hauntings but data points. She saw herself not as an exorcist but as a scientist confronting a new kind of contagion and infection of memory itself. By late July, her notes reveal an unsettling shift in tone. They move from detached analysis to reverence. She no longer describes Greta as patient. She begins to use another term entirely, conduit. The line between observation and belief was vanishing, and within the hospital's decaying halls, the air seemed to change whenever the child spoke. It was the beginning of what Krauss later called the contamination period. By August, the disturbances were no longer limited to Greta's speech. Her body began to react in ways no one could explain. During one morning examination, the clinic's electroencephalograph displayed a waveform unlike any previously recorded. The electrical signals in Greta's brain appeared inverted peaks where troughs should have been, symmetry turned inside out. The technician assumed equipment failure, but when the machine was tested on another patient minutes later, it performed normally. No copies of those readings survive. Krauss's report refers to them as the inversion event. Soon after, another anomaly emerged. Photographic plates used for medical documentation developed faint halos around Greta's hands and temples. These were not light leaks or smudges. The chemical balance was verified independently. The glow appeared only when the child was photographed in a calm state, never during episodes of agitation. One surviving print still shows that radiance, soft and circular, like heat without source. Krauss submitted her findings to the hospital board. They refused further funding. The committee's minutes describe her report as religiously tinted and methodologically unsound. Undeterred, she sought assistance from outside institutions. Letters indicate she contacted a Jesuit research group in Vienna, requesting spiritual consultation. The Vatican declined involvement. At home, Greta's parents began to receive visits from clergy and curiosity seekers alike. Rumors of a child of light spread through Hamburg's refugee districts. Some said her touch cured headaches. Others claimed that animals would not enter the room where she slept. Her mother described nocturnal bleeding from the ears and nose, though no such symptoms appear in the hospital's official log. Krauss faced growing hostility from her peers. Lenz publicly accused her of staging phenomena to secure grants. He demanded the ward be placed under church supervision, but the church wanted no part of it. Faith and science, both wary of humiliation, retreated behind closed doors. Krauss continued her sessions alone. Her notes became more introspective, almost confessional. The body remembers what language denies. She wrote, "We treat symptoms of remembrance, not illness." Greta's pulse fluctuated violently during these later observations, slowing to near sleep, then racing without cause. Lights dimmed, instruments flickered. The line between experiment and ritual blurred. By the end of the month, the hospital was no longer a place of medicine. It had become a shrine of unease, half clinic, half chapel. And the more Krauss documented, the more her colleagues insisted she stop. But it was already too late. Whatever was happening to Greta was beginning to spread. The hospital board met on the first Monday of July to address the growing unrest. Reports of malfunctions, strange lights, and whispered stories among staff had reached city officials. Some demanded Krauss's dismissal. Others wanted the girl transferred to a closed psychiatric facility outside Hamburg, but Krauss refused. She insisted her data was genuine, that the phenomena were measurable, not mystical. Her notes for that week record the words "not hysteria, not faith frequency." To her, Greta's case represented a new biological rhythm, a hidden order beneath consciousness. Her colleagues disagreed. Dr. Lenz, now leading the opposition, argued that the child's symptoms had become contagious through suggestion. He described Krauss's work as self-induced delusion under the guise of research. A formal hearing was scheduled. No transcript of that meeting has ever been found. Meanwhile, the church entered the discussion. Father Matthias Adler, a local parish priest known for his interest in medical miracles, requested permission to visit the clinic. The board approved a single session. He met with Greta for 30 minutes under observation. What transpired remains unknown. No notes survive. Shortly after the visit, Adler requested the entire ward be sealed for spiritual quarantine that same week. A tabloid ran a short column under the headline "The Shining Child of Altena." It described a blessed girl whose eyes hold the light of heaven. The article provided no sources, but it was enough to draw attention from the city's administration. To avoid scandal, the hospital locked the children's ward to all visitors. The lockdown date varies between sources and record July 2nd, others July 9th, but by mid-month, the entire unit was isolated. Krauss continued to document her work in secret. She moved her instruments into the isolation room, using a portable generator when the main power was cut. Her last official memo to the board reads simply, "I will record until the silence returns." Tension divided the staff. Some believed Greta's case could redefine psychiatry. Others saw it as blasphemy, a trespass into forbidden ground. Nurses whispered prayers before entering the room. Orderlies refused night shifts. The institutions split into science on one side, superstition on the other. And in that division, the story of the hospital turned inward, toward fear, secrecy, and contagion. The contagion, as it turned out, would not remain confined to a single child. The first sign of contagion appeared quietly, sometime in mid. A nurse named Vogel noted that 2 other children had begun moving their hands in the same slow gestures Greta used during her sessions. One was 6 years old, the other 11. Neither had been present in the observation room. When questioned, both said the movements came in dreams. Within a week, 4 children across the ward began writing the same phrase during therapy exercises. "The sky is under the sea," each an identical script, though only one of them could write before admission. The handwriting matched Greta's exactly. Dr. Krauss documented every instance. She believed Greta's condition might have created a neurological resonance, a phenomenon where certain patterns of speech or movement transmitted subconsciously between subjects. Her peers called it hysteria. Lenz, furious, accused her of staging the similarities. Yet orderlies unaffiliated with her research also reported strange mimicry during night duty. According to one internal memo, the ward intercom began picking up static at irregular intervals, accompanied by faint murmuring voices. Technicians dismantled the system twice and found no faults. The interference stopped only when Greta was moved to a different floor for examination. The next morning, it returned. Staff turnover rose sharply. 5 employees resigned within the month, citing illness or persistent unease. One nurse later told investigators she heard children chanting in unison long after light. When she entered the dormitory, All of them were asleep. Their lips, however, continued to move. The board dismissed these accounts as exhaustion and stress, but Krause's notes for the same period record physiological data from Greta that seemed tied to the incidents: sudden increases in pulse rate, mild fevers, erratic electrical readings. She began to suspect that Greta's influence might extend beyond suggestion. The girl appeared to anticipate disturbances before they occurred. Her journal entry from July 18th reads, "If thought can transmit itself through speech, perhaps memory can transmit itself through silence." To contain the phenomenon, Krause proposed isolating Greta in a private ward, limiting contact entirely. The decision was reluctantly approved. All other children were moved to temporary quarters, and the dormitory sealed. When the rooms were reopened a month later, staff reported condensation along the inside of the windows' handprints where no one had been. Officially, the contagion was recorded as group behavioral convergence. Unofficially, the term whispered among staff was simpler, the echo. And so began the isolation period, the final phase of the experiment when science attempted to measure what belief could not explain. Greta was moved into the isolation chamber on the evening of the 19th of July 1951. The room measured 3 meters by 4. Its single window covered with heavy cloth. Only medical staff with clearance could enter, and always in pairs. For 14 days, she lived there under continuous observation. The first 48 hours passed uneventfully. Greta ate, slept, and responded politely to simple questions, but on the third night, the temperature in the chamber fell sharply. Thermographic readings taken by a technician showed a drop of 8 degrees. Outside air and heating remained constant. The instruments themselves were tested afterward and found to be functional. Krause's reports from this period are meticulous. Every pulse reading, every tremor recorded. She used an IG, a primitive heart monitor, and a camera equipped with thermographic film. The hospital had only one magnesium flash setup, borrowed from a university physics lab. She used it nightly, photographing Greta in 20-second intervals. On the 22nd of July, 3 electrical devices in the ward fused simultaneously: one EEG, one lamp, and a voltage regulator. Maintenance logs confirm the event but offer no explanation. Krause's notes for that day include a line written in haste: pulse and current in synchrony. Surge coincides with heartbeat. Later that night, Greta reportedly awoke before the nurse entered for observation. She said, "You will measure now," and moments later, the instruments began to hum. According to Krause, it was as though the child knew the schedule in advance. By the end of the week, Krause stopped scheduling tests. Instead, she allowed Greta to dictate when measurements would occur. Each time the girl announced it. The readings showed similar irregularities: temperature drops, mild interference in recording devices, or sudden shifts in pulse rate. Colleagues accused Krause of manipulating results, but the phenomena were witnessed by multiple attendants, none of whom were under her supervision. The hospital board ordered her to halt all photography until an external review could be arranged. Krause ignored the directive. Her personal diary makes her defiance clear. They fear the unknown more than the disease. But fear is not method. After 2 weeks of confinement, Greta showed signs of exhaustion. Her sleep became fragmented. She spoke rarely, sometimes repeating the same word below for minutes at a time. Krause interpreted this as orientation drift, the mind searching for reference points beyond its body. When the observation period ended, Greta was pale.com and almost expressionless. Krause requested one final photographic session, citing closure of sequence. The board reluctantly allowed it, on the condition that a technician and 2 nurses be present. That final exposure would produce the photograph that defined Krause's life and destroyed it. The final session took place on the evening of the 27th of July 1951. The air outside was heavy with summer rain, the light dim even before sunset. Inside the sealed ward, only a red safe light glowed above the sink. The camera stood on a tripod, an old glass plate model using silver bromide emulsion. The exposure time would be 15 seconds. Greta sat on a stool at the center of the room. She wore a plain hospital gown, her hair tied neatly behind her head. 2 nurses were present, along with a lab technician named Henning. Krause positioned the lens, checked the distance, and instructed Greta not to move. According to Henning's latest statement, the room felt electrically charged. The air smelled of ozone. Every sound seemed distant, as though muffled by water. When Krause opened the shutter, the red bulb flickered once and went dark. They counted 15 seconds in silence. When the shutter closed, the light returned to normal. No one spoke. The glass plate was taken immediately to the darkroom. Henning handled the chemical process while Krause recorded times and temperatures. At first, the image seemed to emerge normally: the outline of the girl, the folds of the gown, the background wall. Then the developer darkened beyond expectation. A second form began to appear beside Greta's figure, inverted vertically, as if suspended upside down. The shape was faint at first, then distinct enough to show a face. It was Greta's, older, the same features but elongated, with hollow eyes staring upward. The nurses fled the room. Henning dropped his tray. Krause stood motionless, watching the plate fix into clarity. Her notes from that night are brief: 2 exposures, 1 intention. one reflection from elsewhere. The glass plate was tested repeatedly in the following days. Chemical analysis confirmed it was a single exposure. The emulsion showed no layering, no secondary contact. The pattern of light diffraction was consistent with an ordinary photographic process, and yet, the inverted image had a measurable depth. Its shadows did not align with the original lighting conditions. Krauss argued that the phenomenon was temporal resonance, a recording not of space but of duration. Lenz dismissed it as contamination, though he could not explain how. He accused her of fabricating the results. The board suspended all research pending investigation. When the negative was reprinted weeks later, the secondary figure remained. A forensic review in 1962 confirmed the plate's authenticity. Modern analysts have since verified that the emulsion in glass date precisely to the early 1950s would have created the image. It happened inside that camera. In that moment, rumors spread quickly. Some said the photograph captured a soul dividing. Others claimed it was Nomongrita's body and the shadow of what would soon replace it. Krauss refused to release the image publicly, fearing spiritual panic. But one copy leaked through an archivist years later. That copy, grainy and overexposed, became the centerpiece of post-war parapsychology debates. Witness accounts diverged sharply after the photograph's creation. Some say Krauss collapsed the same night, raving about reflections in glass. Others recall her calmly sealing the plate in a lead-lined box before leaving the ward. Official records confirm only that she was admitted for nervous exhaustion within a week. Her final hospital note reads, "The child and the mirror have parted. The exposure is complete." The photograph was filed away as exposure. No 6.5 earlier tests remain missing. One plate shattered during development. No negatives exist. The surviving glass was stored in a regional archive until 1962, when it was formally catalogued. Its current whereabouts are unknown. Those who have examined it describe a single uncanny detail. The inverted Greta appears older by several years. Forensic analysts estimate the apparent age as 14, but the child in the image had been 9 years old when the shutter opened. What happened inside that room remains unexplained. 15 seconds that defy both chemistry and time. The moment a girl and her reflection ceased to agree on which one was real. On the morning of the 5th of August 1951, 9 days after the photograph was taken, Greta was found unresponsive in her bed. She had been calm the previous evening, according to the night nurse's log. Her pulse, temperature, and respiration were all normal. Sometime before dawn, her breathing stopped. Doctors worked for hours, recording faint signs of brain activity but no consciousness. She remained in a coma for 36 hours. Then, without warning, her heartbeat accelerated and ceased entirely. The official cause of death was listed as sudden cerebral edema. No hemorrhage, no trauma, no infection. The attending physician noted an unusual environmental reading. The temperature inside Greta's room had fallen to 8 degrees Celsius, even though the outside air measured 27. The heating system showed no malfunction. The record ends with a short remark: phenomenon localized, not atmospheric. Krauss was barred from the ward immediately after the death. The hospital board confiscated her files and ordered the photographic materials sealed. Greta's parents were notified but denied access to the body until the following day. When they arrived, they reported that her eyes appeared discolored, the irises pale gray instead of blue. Autopsy records mention optic nerve pigmentation of uncertain cause. There were no lesions, no signs of disease. Krauss's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She refused to eat, slept in her office, and wrote incessantly in notebooks now lost to history. Witnesses recall her muttering the same sentence again and again. It moved when she did not. Within a week she was placed on administrative leave. 2 months later, she left Hamburg entirely. Greta was buried in an unmarked grave outside the city. The hospital's death register lists only her initials. Her case file was removed from active archives and reclassified as closed research material. Krauss resurfaced briefly in 1956, admitted to a sanatorium in Bavaria under her maiden name. She died there in 1961, officially of pneumonia. In her final letter to a colleague, she wrote, "We called it illness, but it was direction the body turning toward itself." After her death, investigators re-examined the sealed archives. Several documents were missing, including the patient logbook for July 1951, the envelope containing exposure No. 6 remained intact but unlabeled. With Greta's death, the experiments ended, but the echoes did not. Staff who had worked in the ward reported recurring dreams of corridors filled with cold light. Some claimed to hear faint humming when the photograph was mentioned. The silence had returned, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of something still listening. Decades later, Greta's case returned to public attention. The photograph resurfaced in 1962 when the asylum's remaining archives were transferred to a regional repository. A single note attached to the envelope read, "Chemical record handle with gloves." The curator who opened it claimed the image was so clear, he thought it modern. When the cataloging team verified the glass and emulsion, the result was unequivocal. Early 1950s manufacture. From that moment, exposure No. 6 became a legend, Psychologists, theologians, and physicists each claimed it as proof of their own theories. For some, it demonstrated a unique case of mass hysteria post or trauma crystallized into image. For others, it hinted at something far older, a boundary between physical and metaphysical states briefly captured by chance. Neurologists suggested temporal lobe epilepsy. They argued that Greta's fits of speech reversal, her borrowed memories, and the hallucinated voices could all stem from abnormal brain activity. One paper in the 1970s described the case as collective projection, where multiple observers misinterpret symptoms under emotional stress. Yet none of these theories explain the anomalies documented by instruments, the temperature drops, the synchronized power surges, or the double exposure that could not have occurred. Psychiatrists pointed instead to context. The asylum operated in an era of experimental therapies, many now discredited. Children were medicated with tranquilizers later banned for toxicity. Hallucination was common, memory unreliable. If Greta's behaviors influenced others, it may have been through imitation, not infection. Folklorists approached it differently. Among nurses who once worked in the ward, a whispered story survived the mirror children. They claimed that sometimes a sick child could cast their illness into another, splitting the self like reflection on water. The legend described a mirror death, where one body faded while another remained as its echo. The phrase appears in a marginal note inside a nurse's ledger from 1952. The girl who saw herself twice. In 1994, forensic experts examined the glass plate again. The emulsion was intact. Microscopic study found diffraction patterns inconsistent with any known lens artifact. The secondary imagely inverted Greta registered slightly different focus depth, as if existing at another distance from the camera. Light itself seemed to have folded. Nearly a decade later, in 2003, a digital reconstruction was attempted. Technicians scanned the image in high resolution, building a three-dimensional model of the exposure. When they rendered it, the inverted figure did not align with any optical distortion. It appeared independently suspended, its proportions subtly older, its expression ambiguous, neither grief nor recognition. The report concluded, the artifact remains unexplained by mechanical means. Modern skeptics dismissed the legend as a fusion of myth and poor record-keeping, yet each attempt to debunk it ends where Krauss's notes began, with data that should not exist. Every measurement, every chemical test, every surviving page insists the impossible was recorded under controlled conditions. Science insists on evidence. This case provides too much and none that can be replicated. The photograph reappeared once more, at a private exhibition in Bonn in 2012. Only a handful of visitors saw it before it was withdrawn without explanation. Those who attended recalled the image as faintly luminous, as though the glass itself held residual light. No photography was permitted, but a leaked catalog entry confirmed the label, Exposure No. 6, Erkenite. Since then, the plate has vanished again. Its last known custodian, an independent curator, claimed it was returned to a private scientific collection. No record of that transaction exists. Today, Exposure No. 6 lives mostly in reproduction or resolution scans circulating through academic papers, online archives, and conspiracy forums. Each version loses a little clarity, as if the image resists duplication. Even in copies, the inverted child remains visible, her face tilted upward in that impossible symmetry of innocence and decay. Scholars continue to divide along familiar lines. Chemists insist on natural explanation, contamination, light leaks, misfiled exposures. Historians counter with documentation, the consistent witness accounts, the confirmed materials, the chronological gaps that defy tidy resolution. Psychologists call it mass suggestion. Folklorists call it a mirror-given form. Every interpretation circles the same silence, a girl, a camera, and 15 seconds no one can fully account for. In the decades since, the asylum has been demolished. Its foundations now lie beneath a housing complex. Residents sometimes report electrical fluctuations, brief power failures during heavy rain. A few mention strange reflections in their hallway mirrors, shapes that seem to blink when they do not. No formal investigation has ever linked these stories to the photograph, but they persist, as persistent as the image itself. In her final letter, Dr. Helene Krauss wrote, "We cannot cure what the world refuses to measure." She may have been wrong about many things, but not about that. Whether Greta's case was science, superstition, or something between, it remains an unanswered equation, a record of light, time, and fear captured in a medium that never lies, yet never tells the whole truth. If you have seen a copy of Exposure No. 6 or know where it resides, contact the archive. They're still searching for the original, and according to those who last handled it, the glass was warm to the touch.